All right, thank you all for joining me right after the break. I appreciate you back on time. My name is Dan Sparacio. I work for Paramount Central JavaScript video player team. My talk is Caption Me If You Can, so let's get started. All right, I hear this a lot. What's captions, what's subtitles, what's the difference? Let's just make it really quick and clear. Captions will convey the dialogue, the narration, plus integral or essential audio effects, let's say, and subtitles are really about translating one language to another, foreign translations. You can go beyond that with subtitles, SDHs for the deaf and hard of hearing, which kind of does both functions. So that is the difference. We'll get a little bit deeper into that. This is a caption. So this is telling someone has no audio on, whether it's audible problems or just in a subway with no earbuds. It's telling you that cheers are continuing on. This is also a caption. There is no essential audio or effects in here, but it is kind of saying that, I call it a caption because the primary audio of this media presentation is English and the text is also in English. Some other things that can be classified as audio effects are honking of cars, screeching, anything along that. Music playing, it denotes with a note on it. They also say starting to play when a song starts up, things of that nature. This is a caption denoting volume of her voice when she says, "my captain." It's a whisper, but if I go into the UI and change the text to Italian, we have now got a subtitle on screen on the same frame and the same scene. The assumption is that the scene is audible and that you will hear the characters whispering and don't need that extra denotation. So obviously SDHs would come and play there and it would bring back whispering, but in Italian. All right, so translation is very important for a company that wants to globalize their content like Paramount's doing right now. But forced narratives is a very key part of that. We're starting to see this a lot in the industry. It's not a new concept. We've been doing it with burnt in for a long time. But you can't change the language when it's burnt in. So what's forced narrative used for? Good examples of this are sign language, foreign language scenes where the actual primary audio is English, but you may have a Spanish scene for a minute or two. Unconventional dialogue like the infamous Klingon example, obfuscated audio like a police radio or slurred words, things of that nature. The team I work with just implemented this for Paramount and we don't have all of our content curated for this yet and set up, but we have the players set up for it. So really quickly, I just wanted to talk how it works. It's a automatic subtitling, again, to force a narrative. It's aligned with the language of the audio track. So if the content has an English forced narrative track, most likely it will have an English main captions track, and it will also have, it will be matched to the audio track. If the user at any point turns on subtitles, and let me digress for a second, this is only on when subtitles are disabled in the player. When the user turns on subtitles, it basically switches to the main caption track that holds all the forced narratives and all the other subtitles or captions for that. See, I'm also interchanging the words captions and subtitles. The subtitles for that. So forced narratives are only on when disabled, complete subtitle track for language presented. And now the thing that I'm noticing, and more, there's a lot of forced narratives in certain content. It could be a heading of a bank in a foreign language or a road sign or something like that. And these cannot be turned off. So I'm wondering if AI is starting to do stuff where it's putting too many captions in there and generating it, and it's almost a little bit annoying on some scenes and you cannot turn it off. So maybe something to think about in the future. This is a good example of when I say early bound or burnt in text into a studio master. This is a Halo scene. It says light the beacon. I go to my menu in Paramount Plus and I select Italian, and now we have a problem. We have the text over the top, so to remedy this, we have to go back to the studios, we have to get them to recut the master without the text. Meanwhile, we may take all the cues out for that language or all languages that would overlap, republish all that. Once we get the master, put it on, you get the story. It's a big rigmarole just to take this out, but that's what we have to do. All right, so great, subtitles, captions, we all know what they are, we've seen them forever. There's lots of formats on the upload side, on the publishing house side that come into the platform, but there's really only a few that come out into the player. I'm a player developer. This whole talk's around the video player. We're talking about from JavaScript perspective, not from native players. So first is 708. I hear 608, 708, CEA, so it's CTA 708 is the latest convention for this, and we're talking about 708 as the Digital television, ATSC, predecessor of 608, around 2002, 608 fell out of compliance with FCC regarding styling for the user. This is a very key point I want you to remember today. The theme throughout the theme throughout the speech is really about styles for the end user. So the difference 708, 608, again, is they added styles. You can see on the right, set 3 sizes, different fonts, things like that. Can't have a slide without mentioning TTML. Back in the Flash days, DFXP, TTML, lots very used. Went into WebVTT. JavaScript loves XML, we all know that. Just kidding. And TTML2 spec, IMSC is really what I'm looking forward to in the future, but for right now, we are working with WebVTT. We all know WebVTT, it's a very simple format. It's modeled off of SRT, subrip format from DVD days. But it added styles, and that's the difference between SRT. It added alignment, positioning, styles, and things like that. VTT can be delivered to the JavaScript player in 3 different ways. Sidecar file, super inefficient, parsed up in front, long media presentation gets put in, kind of useless if they leave. Segmented VTT is more efficient. Take that same sidecar file, chunk it up, deliver it to the player. Doesn't work on all devices. So take that same chunked VTT, put it in MP4 encapsulation, works on Roku now. So enough about that. Let's get into kind of the meat of the talk here, regulations, conformance, and standards. So lawsuits, this is why we are laser focused on this for the last couple of years at Paramount. Captions are governed by the FCC under the CVAA. The FCC basically says if it was shown on television with caption, if it's reshown on the internet, it must have captions as well. There's lots of, live events can be recaptioned within X amount of hours if it was live captioning for better accuracy and timing. But they do regulate this. And why I'm bringing real quick, there we go. This slide's interesting. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a huge increase in federal Title III ADA. Now, this is not just captionings. ADA is all of the ADA accessibilities. But obviously, CVAA is within that. And notably, over the last 4 years, we've had a huge increase. Why do I mention this? So last year, Pluto was on the receiving end. Pluto TV is part of Paramount Global. It's part of our structure. We have Paramount Plus, Pluto TV as our main flagship products. Last year, they were on the receiving end of the first ever prosecuted captions-related case. So a statement from the FCC. The action against Pluto TV marks the first consent decree and the first enforcement action related to closed captioning rules that applies to the internet-based services since their adoption in 2012. Well, we were first to market with something, so slow and steady wins the race, though, I will say. So let's be fair. FCC monitors is now very close. We meet with them, or our lawyers meet with them to talk about why things aren't working. This includes completeness, synchronization, speed, placement. But let me not forget to mention this. The lawsuit was not about any of those things. It was about styles missing from the user interface for the end user. Again, styling is very important for the text. So enough about the lawsuits. How do we manage all the text coming in on the platform side? Well, Paramount uses machine learning to analyze and autocorrect all the incoming text sources. AI and ML to generate text, which is kind of sometimes not very accurate. This can be prone to errors, so we also use humans, we use vendors for this. Lots of different people, and with lots of different people doing things globally, you get variations and interpretations of what the spec is. So we use tools like this, like Baden, and other vendor tools that will check and autocorrect or flag things that are wrong, and then humans may go fix it and republish it. There's some interesting things that this could check for. Pardon me. Time cone alignment is a good one. Drop versus non-drop frame, which is interesting. Some film, maybe older film, has a 30 FPS versus a fractional 29.9. There's a talk about this tomorrow, I believe, and much deeper than this, but that ends to about 3.6 seconds of drift over an hour, which causes sync issues with the video. Other things are accuracy and speed. FCC regulates speed. It's a very interesting, it's like 5/16 per character a second on screen or something. But they do regulate it. I find it subjective. I have problems with captions that are way too fast. Pardon me. Things like that, though, so you can check it. Here's a kind of a cute analog to that. This is an auto-generated caption. It says broil on high for 4 to 5 minutes, the audio does, and you should not preheat the oven. And then the automatic caption says broil on high for 45 minutes, you should know to preheat the oven. This resulted in a fire. All right, this is another kind of cute one on this. So this is Paramount's The Offer. This is Mr. Sparacio. He owns the restaurant. It's actually my last name in the audio, but it's not spelt right, which I found while doing this presentation. So we noticed it, and it's actually Mr. Sparacio. Oh, he owns the restaurant. I don't say my name like that because I'm not in the offer, but we get the point. So this is interesting too, because there's a talk tomorrow about how can we crowdsource or fix these things when you find them. In this case, I know that's the right spelling. All right, so this is the fun part. Let's try this demo here. What I want you to watch, on the left you have native tracks, on the right you have custom tracks. We'll get into what that means in a second, but just notice the differences between them while I play this. You notice on the left, things are moving around a bit, where on the right they're centered. The idea here is to put dramatic captioning or placement over motion of the actor and to kind of split up. You saw he was walking. Let's see, there's a really good one here at the end. Again, on the right, always centered. All right, so that's the video. Let's go to the next slide here. This is the scene I really wanted to point out. On the left, you can absolutely tell what's going on, and on the right, you don't know who's saying what. Now, you can fix this by putting speaker narrations in there, but that was not what the publisher wanted. That was not the creative's intent. They wanted it to be placed over the speaker and move around. But we're not doing that when you custom render. So why would we ever custom render on web? Why wouldn't we just use the cool native tracks, right? Well, we'll get to that in a second. So native tracks are great. They have a little bit of differences. This is the same scene, same cue, 2 different browsers, slightly aligned different, slight different interpretation of what the line numbers may mean. But sometimes they're way off. Different browsers, same cue, same scene. And something like this was caused by middle versus center and the alignment of the cue. Simple problem to fix, but it was a problem until we found it. We can solve some of this stuff in the player in the native tracks. There's no problem moving positions. There's lots of tools out there, lots of ways to do it. The problem we found is interpreting it correctly. So the creatives still have not fully got together on screen size, safe zones, aspect ratios and things for placement. If it's in 708, it has to be translated to VTT, which doesn't have a finalized spec to do so. If you have to translate it for custom, it goes to CSS, which now we are in 3 different rings of translation. Alignment features are not supported half the time. On the browsers, we are browser-based or web standard. So this is not, such an easy task. We tend to just put it center, let it be aligned, and carry on. So we said, surely the accessibility panels will work. That's gotta be FCC regulated, and we want to use these native tracks for the spacing and the custom and the cool things that we don't want to have to reinvent. And of course, they don't work. What we found is if you own the OS in the browser, typically works. If you don't, it doesn't work. So Xbox does a good job. Shout out to Microsoft. Most of the game consoles do. A lot of the mobile phones do. That's great. You see the box on the left. They style it. Actually shows up in the Chromium text track here. This is Mac OS, again, that same scene, picking up all the Safaris on top. It's picking up all of the styles that we set in the left, but Chrome on the bottom is not. And if you go to other browsers on that same scene, it gets even worse. So we can try to style these with CSS, right? It always works. There's only pseudo cues that work. There is no CSS that you can put on text tracks or the container. They're part of the DOM under the video element. They do work sometimes. They work on some browsers, but they don't work all the times. And again, you need it to work all the time, otherwise the FCC will be knocking at your door. You put some stuff in the style. I just put this in here for one reason, really to show that this is bold and italic. It's the only time we would ever use something in an actual VTT. The style stuff with the cues and the headers cause parsers on certain devices, namely Edge Spartan, to fail. So what do we do about it? We custom render everything, meaning we build those accessibility panels or menus inside of our applications. To apply all that CSS that may come out of that, we must custom render VTTQ into HTML. What that means finally is the application will listen for Q events from the actual text track that's in the DOM, but it will hide that and not show them, and it will render the text. It will get the event, it will take the payload out, it will render in HTML, append it to the DOM, style it, position as you needed, whatever translation, and basically, again, we lose the native track positioning, so you have to implement that yourself. Things that are must-have, as you can see on the left there, is the full gamut and a subset on Paramounts. The left one is Pluto's, and the right one is Paramount's. 7 font size, 3 font colors, 8 font backgrounds, and such. So styling captions are useful to dial in what works best for the background. We all know that. Maybe they're colorblind, there's that aspect. Maybe they are watching a movie and want less interference, but they want the captions. Or maybe they're watching news and captions improperly placed over the lower third and they can't read the text, so they change the opacity. With doing custom rendering, we see a couple more bugs that I wanted to talk about that you have to handle yourself. The translation of VTT to CSS is not always straightforward. 708, I mentioned this already, but 708 to VTT, then to CSS, you even lose more. With native tracks, the news segment renders, if I would actually play the CBS News stream, it renders top left, 3-line roll-up like it should. Here, it's actually rendering center bottom because they did nothing for it and rolls down. This bug's been fixed. We are addressing this right now, but it's something that we have to deal with. Another one is when you have those dramatic captions, sometimes when it gets parsed, it sometimes, especially with 708, turns into 2 Qs with the same time codes, with the same text, duplication of Qs. You do have to dedupe those, otherwise you will end up with something like this, and you don't want to see repeating text on screen. My favorite one is font size, and there's an open bug in Chromium right now that basically it's to do with collision detection of the control bar, and if captions get too close. And there's HLSJS-A, they all do kind of some fixes in there for it, with an arbitrary number, and it works great until you bump the font size up, which you have to do for the FCC, and then it flips the Qs. So this is not a very good scene, especially if you're Yoda. You don't want your Qs flipped. All right, so this is the player. This is basically what a look at, no matter what caption format, TTML, VTT, CTA, it comes in, it gets parsed by some parser in JavaScript. They all end up, though, as a VTTQ or some custom queue like Shaka would use. There is a start time, end time, text, other attributes for styling in there. They get parsed and put into the text track, and they run and they're synchronized along the text track based on the video playhead time. So there's 3 modes to this text track. I am just talking about a single language right now in text, or but there are 3 modes of that text track. First is disabled, which allows the player to not have to download any segments. It's efficient mode. There's not going to be any chunks download. It's not going to fire events. It's not going to put any captions on the screen. The second mode is hidden. As the playhead moves along, you will reach a time, an event will be passed out, and it will not render captions on screen. This is how we render custom captions. Native captions is the mode showing. Does everything for you, don't have to do much. All right, so I'm going to step into multilingual, the feature of multiple languages in a web app and how it works. So notice there's some chunks every time I change the language, a couple more chunks for that download. It gets parsed immediately and puts on screen. So this is multiple languages supported for captions. It's not a huge deal. But why do I mention this? Well, in the web, we have 3 modes. We put ours to hidden. We have to do that so we can custom render so the FCC doesn't fine us. And as you change languages, maybe another text track would be created, and another text track, and another text track, and that seems fine. That seems easy to deal with the list, but unfortunately on the web, you can't remove those text tracks once they're added to the DOM. The only way to do it is to completely nuke the video element and recreate the video element and then re-add the text tracks. So we don't find this as a good approach. It doesn't work. I'll explain why in a minute, but. So inspired by Shaka, thank you, Joey. We appreciate all your work and all the open source projects. We are heavily utilizers of them and contributors on them. But we like this idea of never putting anything more than 1 text track in the DOM, call it generic, manage everything in JavaScript. So just really another shout out that we're doing everything ourselves, and the W3 standards that are in web browsers, facilities for captioning, have not changed for a decade, and essentially well, there's been some changes, but to be fair, these things haven't changed. So real quick, how does this work? It's in an English track audio. I got some chunks in the text track already. Some more chunks come down from the server, they get parsed, they get put in that text track. I change my language to French. Immediately we prune everything in the text track and cancel all the in-flights, pick up from the exact point in the playhead time and forward. We don't backfill the buffer, but we do prune out all the backfill in case you seek and you don't want English in the back of the buffer. And that's essentially it. It's easy to manage. You could have 300 languages or one, and it's the same process, and you just have to kind of go with that. I'll say it's easy, but maybe we should speak to Joey to make sure. Why is this important to us? Well, we're starting to get into more serious things. There's VOD to live, multiple periods, multiple boundaries. And we've seen a lot of problems, like packagers will throw out node order or ID order of a track. Between periods may differ. We've seen that cause problems. Ads don't have tracks, they're not encrypted, they're inserted. That may cause problems for the player to know where it should go if it starts in an ad. Things like this. And I mentioned you have to kill the video element to get rid of the other text tracks. Well, you can't do that in a series like this when you have a linear stream, whether it's VOD to live or live, and you're going through periods and you have text tracks being added. So the use case here is we may have 5 caption tracks in the first content, and then there may be 5 different ones in the next 30-minute segment, and 5 different ones in the next segment. And the player needs to know about all those unless we refresh the player, get new manifests or something, but we also don't want to add tracks for all those and have to manage that as we go into new languages that don't exist in the previous section. So one thing we found with experiment with some of our packaging guys and folks is that obviously ordering the tracks in the same, keeping it consistent is helpful for the player, but also putting pseudo tracks in ads if you own your ad encoding with blank cues in them, but just so they're there and the player doesn't have to actually try to find something and switch back to the track that was there and persist it. It may seem like such a simple thing in web, you just keep your state, do this and that, but there's weird stuff. Like even on Roku, if you joined a stream, an SSA stream on the ad, and there were not captions in it, the captions wouldn't show up in the content itself. So these are the problems we have. So with that, I want to point out my most important slide of the day, I believe, is all these things have been around for a decade as a problem, in my opinion. I've been doing this since the Flash days. I worked in Dash.js in 2013, 14, 15, and 16. It was a problem then. I wrote really bad solutions in Dash.js for this, and we need to rewrite those now, like what Shaka does. There's no way we can keep adding tracks like it does at every period. That aside, we can handle this all at the web. The problem is these are baked in to smart TVs and will be for a long time. What I mean by baked in is that the 2 biggest providers from in our Conviva backlog that is not Roku or native is LG and Samsung. And if you look at 2015 or 2016 and 17, you have Chrome 47 on it. Their newest TVs were shipping out with Chrome 48 or 85, which is like a year and a half old at this point. So these things will persist. You cannot update them. Basically, you have to throw the TV in the landfill and get a new TV if you want features. And I think that is a huge problem. It means that all the stuff we talked about, that Google bug with the flipping cues, is going to be baked in and a problem for at least another 10 years, unless we just get rid of all this and just do it ourselves like we're doing. Maybe that's where IMSC1 becomes more powerful. We don't have to wait for people to do it. There's lots of talks there. But with that, I am going to say thank you for listening, or I'm going to finish with some final thoughts. Then I'll say thank you. So better captioning facilities on web to meet FCC regulations and user requirements. Abandon W3 methods is what we've been doing in order to meet these requirements. Forced narrative and multilingual are great features to globalize, but they're really hard to manage due to all the stuff I've said. Conditioning multi-audio and SSAI is very important, I believe, to keep the player not trying to jump around since it has to manage all of this. And finally, smart TV manufacturers must stay current with streaming technologies. CTA Wave's doing great work with this. I think we all need to join in with them. Thank you very much.